The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on Facebook. Just look for The Writer's Dream. If you want to be on the show, you can message me through The Writer's Dream Facebook. We are also on Cablevision Channel 20, Long Island, at 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. We are here at LTV. Just go on to ltv-eh.org and just click on videos and go down the list and you'll find the show. We're probably somewhere else, but right now I can't think of it because I'd really like to get to our guest today, who is Thomas Michael Cassidy, and he is really involved in some of the most interesting project that every author wants to do, and that's creating a movie from his experiences. So let me tell you a little bit about Tom, and then we'll let him talk. Okay, so based on his experiences as a former senior investigator for New York State's Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and his experiences with his father, who was Hugh Joe Cassidy, a retired New York Police Department detective commander, he has come up with a number of stories and experiences because of his career with the the New York City Police Department. So he's written a book called Damage Control. He's written other books too, but this is the current project, and it's a fast-moving mystery based on some of the experiences that he's gleaned from his father, his friends, and his own experiences. So welcome, Tom. Tell us about Damage Control.
It's great to be here. Yes, Damage Control is the first book that I ever attempted to write, and that was about now going back more than 30 years ago.
Oh, dear.
And I was working as an investigator, and I had some great partners and colleagues that I worked with. One of them, who I worked on many cases with, his name was Frank Keenan, and Frank was a retired New York City detective sergeant in Manhattan South Homicide. And he shared many exciting cases that he worked on, and we worked on many cases together, and also many other people that I had the chance to work with. But in particular, Frank became more than just a colleague. He became a friend and a mentor for me in learning to be an investigator. So it was back in 1991 that sadly, right after Frank had retired for the last time and was relocating to go to Florida, that unfortunately, shortly after he moved there, he died, and it really hit me hard. And to the point where one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I had this vivid dream that the detectives from Manhattan South Homicide were on the case on a really impressive and interesting investigation. And as I was dreaming, all of a sudden I just woke up like a jolt of lightning hit me. And then I thought to myself, wow, Frank could have written such a great story. And I said, he can't do it, so I'm going to try to do it. So I got up out of bed. I went out to my kitchen. I wrote down a table of contents, and then I went back to sleep. And then that was the start of my writing career. So I started writing. I didn't call it Manhattan South then. I started writing my book, Damage Control. And my first attempt at writing, because I had 6 children, my wife and I had 6 children living at home, and I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and write before I had to go to work. Mm-hmm. It was the only time it was totally quiet in the house. And then I would write, and then I'd go to work. And after 3 weeks, I finished my book. And then I found out my book was only 12 pages long. And I thought to myself,
I don't know.
Yeah, I said, I don't think I'm really a writer yet. I think I need some work. And it was very fortunate that, but it opened my eyes up to the fact that how difficult and challenging it is for any author to try to write a book. And it seems if you don't do it, like I know you've written numerous books yourself and you have a whole series, but the first one I'm sure was just as challenging for you as it was for me. And when I started to write the book, I realized I needed I really needed to develop some skills. And I started to take books out to read about how to write a book. And at that time, at Stony Brook University, they were one of the professors. Her name was Deborah Hecht. She had an open to the public meeting every Friday. It was called Coffee and Conversation, and all different authors, musicians, songwriters would all gather together, and she would have a guest speaker come in, and we would all be able to talk with each other about the challenges that we faced. And it was a real eye opener for me. And then I was very fortunate that Deborah agreed. I talked to her that I needed an editor, and she said that she would edit for me. And she became my first editor, which I absolutely needed. She was really instrumental in helping me get started. And so I wrote a book. I started Damage Control, which is a detective mystery, which takes place in 1981. But I was also encouraged to write a book on elder care because I was a health fraud and patient abuse investigator for the New York State Attorney General's office. And people were always asking me, what should I look for when I go to a nursing home? What should I do if I need to hire somebody? What's an assisted living? What should I? And I was just my experience, and also in Medicare and Medicaid. And so my wife was the one who said to me, she said, Tom, I think you should really write a book on elder care because people are always asking you so many questions. So I transitioned to writing a nonfiction book, which I found a publisher for almost uh, within months. And then I started to write that book. All the time I kept going back to my detective mystery. And then it took me like I say, almost 25 years before I had my detective mystery published. And but in the meantime, I wrote some nonfiction books, which helped me to develop skills as a writer. And I changed jobs. I worked as a senior fellow at a think tank called the Institute for Socioeconomic Studies, and I was that there my job was to do research and write. So I had an editor that I worked with there, and editors I think are just extremely important, and you need feedback because you need to get somebody. If you can't afford to have a professional editor, if you find people I think that are re- avid readers with good reading skills that can help you and be honest with you, then I think that that can help you to develop your writing skills.
Yeah, well, you describe a journey that is very important for people who are listening to the show or watching the show to understand is that when you start as a writer, you really need to learn what it is to make a book. And when I started writing, I knew nothing about creating a book. I mean, I could write a story, and I was always told I was a good storyteller or a liar. I'm really not sure which. But at any rate, so I took a course. And I took that one, and then the second one after that with the same institute. I don't even know what they're called anymore. And I wrote the first two books.
Nice.
But I learned about all that stuff. I learned how to stretch out the story and fill in so that you'd have at least 100 pages. And
Right.
then, you learn about the editor, and you have to have a good editor. So I used their services, and it was
Mhm.
worth it because they showed me what needed to be done to produce a decent book. And those two books are still pretty popular.
Excellent.
So it's that journey and it's that learning. I don't know too many people who just sit down and write a book. And some people can write a book that's 1,000 pages and needs to be edited,
Right.
but but
I,
mostly short stuff.
you need to have some feedback, and you need to work at it. And you have to realize it's and then I think you just gain so much respect for all people who write books. And I think what Deborah Hecht had told me, and I think we discussed this before, that she told me the first thing she said is if you want to be a good writer, you have to read. So you have to constantly read. And I was reading, I started to read more books. And it's not that I'm trying to copy what someone else does, it's just that you get
You
into a
learn
rhythm.
tips.
Right.
Yes.
You're getting a rhythm of like how the writing flows. and it stimulates your thinking. And it's I just started to read more whenever I had the opportunity. Whether I was reading, if I was in the car, I could listen to an audiobook, but it was just constantly trying to do as much reading and listening as I could do, so that without even thinking, it was helping me to develop my own writing skills.
You also did something that was very important. You had an area of expertise, and you were very good at it. And nonfiction books sell better than fiction books. And so, because of your expertise, you could get a publisher.
Right.
Once you publish, no matter what it is, magazine articles or a nonfiction book, then what happens is you have like you have a something to stand. You have a platform of work to show, and
Hmm.
you say, "I was published," and then you can get something for your not for your fiction book. So that was a very important step, whether you knew it or not when you did it. But I
Well,
also,
I knew when I did it, I was excited. I didn't know what to expect, and what happened was I had the publisher. It was New Horizon Press Books that published my first book on eldercare. They Once I had the contract for them, I retired from my job, and I felt like I couldn't do both. You can't, like in the position I had, I couldn't be uh, saying what my thoughts are on something, because that wouldn't have been acceptable. So, but I didn't know how long it would take for a book to be published if you go through the traditional publishing. And
mhm,
so I thought, well, I better leave, because I thought it'd be out in like 2 months or something. It was a year and a half later,
that was
and
fast, actually.
yeah,
That was
and the
fast.
and the way I found out about it was I was now working at that think tank I mentioned, and the receptionist got a call from CNN for me. And I'm like, CNN, why are they calling me? I'm sitting here at my desk, right, doing research on Medicare or something. And they said they want me on. The producer just said, do you want to come on Tuesday or Wednesday? I'm like, what? And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
and then I called, I said, being the way I thought, maybe it's like being an investigator, or maybe it's just common sense, but I just thought to myself, if somebody gives me a choice of Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm taking Tuesday. Because if something goes wrong, then I can fall back on Wednesday. So I'm not taking Wednesday. I can't
That
go
was
back
smart.
to Tuesday. So I had to take Tuesday. And then I called my publisher, and they said they had sent out their public relations, and they had sent it to all different media outlets. I'm like, really? I didn't even have a copy of the book yet. And then I found out they changed the title. And so, and I'm like, well, a lot is happening here. And so, but everything kind of worked out. They were really wonderful. I was so glad I had the chance to work with them. It was a life changer, but
Okay,
it was exciting.
I'm going to ask you to give a little summary of the book, because we're like a halfway through the show and I want to get to the movie. So
Okay.
give us a little summary of Damage Control.
Okay. Damage Control is a New York City detective mystery. The setting is 1981. And basically, what happens is a rising star detective commander named John Donnellan is a detective commander at Manhattan South Homicide. And he got his position because the first female and black chief of detectives, Emma Dickinson, promoted him to the position at Manhattan South, and they were looked out for each other. And everything was going smoothly, although 1981, it was a high crime rate in New York City,
Yes.
and people were really outraged. But their relationship, they were doing okay. But then the detective commander, John Donnellan, his best friend is a movie star who comes to New York City and gets murdered in his penthouse. And he wants to keep the case, but the detective commander and the detectives don't want him on the case because he's too close to the victim. But he pleads to keep the case, and he gets it. And then he's not getting any leads. There's nothing happening. The only lead they have is that the night before his friend was murdered, there was a beautiful young blonde lady rather, that was seen racing from the building,
Ah,
and nobody recognized who she was. And then he gets very desperate, because the media is going wild on, like, who's this, blonde bombshell and all the rest of it. And meanwhile, he has to try to solve the murder of his best friend. And then he gets really demoralized. And on the sly, he decides to go and to the five families and ask them
ah.
if they'll help him find out who the murderer was. And so that's where I'll leave it for right now. So you
Oh, no, that's
stay
great.
tuned. You got to find out what happened.
I
And
remember the 1980s in the city. I grew up in the city, and my first husband worked at the Daily News,
mhm,
and we were still married at that time. And boy, I would go into the city often. I would meet him at the Daily News building,
right.
and that was a nice part of town. But boy, you had to really be careful. The
No,
subways were awful. Long Island Railroad is so different today.
I know it was a very difficult time. That was like almost at the height of the crack epidemic. I think that New York's city sadly was starting to have more murders, breaking records for murders, almost 2,000 murders in New York City in that year. So it was tough times, but and so that's what the what this damage control is about, and it's the chase to try to find out who was
Who that
if
blonde
they can,
was,
if well, who the blonde was, and who who murdered his best friend.
right?
And was she a witness, or was she a suspect? And so there's a lot of different things that are going on. Um, I don't know if you want me to tell any more, or do you
No,
think
no,
that's it?
no, no, no. We
Okay,
never get to the part where it gives it away. So now we're going to get to the part that every author dreams of, and that's producing a movie based on some of our writing. So tell us
right.
about Midtown South.
Okay. Well, what happened is that, and this is why we mentioned before that the way I met you, Linda, is that I was a member of the Long Island Authors Group.
Mhm.
And I think for any authors, anybody listening that wants to be an author, that getting out and meeting people is the most essential thing. And so by me going to the authors group, and one of the guest speakers that we had who came in was talking about different uh, types of that actually that audiobooks were the fastest growing segment of the publishing
Mhm.
world. So and then I had already started working on narrating my book Damage Control. But I did speak with one of the other authors in our group who had a CD made of that he narrated at a company in Deer Park called Formats Unlimited. And so I went there to them because at that time I still do have friends that are not into the digital world, and they would like to have the CDs and they don't want to listen on Audible.
Mhm.
So I went and I had the CD made, and then in conversations with the the production company over there, we started a podcast. And this was the producer name is uh, Mike Dorita, and he is somebody over there that started podcasting. And so with I started a podcast with him called Manhattan South, and then we got picked up where somebody was interested in trying to have a, 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 a school, an acting school that wanted to have some actors try to take the parts and make a pilot for for the school. And so I worked on that with him, and he was an actor also. His name is Chris Cardona, and then as I was doing that, I started to realize that writing. I learned about writing a script is different than writing a book.
Mhm.
And basically, like a film script
Play.
or a play script is different than, it's not a skill set that I have.
Mhm.
But I learned that what you need to do is to write and try to stay focused. And I wrote what they call a film treatment. That's what I've been working on now, treatments. A treatment is a step before the script. And in the film script, or you would have uh, the script would say, like, for example, if you were and I were having a script about what we're doing now, that would may say that, Linda is sitting in this chair and there's books behind her and there's a door here, and they have the whole setting there. Whereas for me, I'm not that detailed about where somebody should be sitting and all the rest of it. And so I started writing um, the treatments, which I felt and still feel are more in line with what I'm doing, because whatever film treatments I do, which I do, the film treatment is done in 3 acts. So you have acts and scenes, and you'll have act one scene may have 5 or 6 scenes. Then act two, which is usually about act one is like 25%, act two is like 50%, and the final is like 25%. So you have these acts that you write, but and then you put the scenes
I feel
in. I
like
like
condensing the book.
you're condensing the book, but you're putting in the dialogue, you're setting the scene. Like I put where the scene is, I put the dialogue in. And now I think if I was to give it to somebody who wanted to, which I'm trying to pitch to get a movie made, then
Mhm.
they would have this nucleus of what they need to do. They would be able to say, now, how do we want to do it? And I know a number of people I've spoken to in the film industry, and they've all basically told me that, how do you feel if somebody buys your film and they change it? And I'm like, well, then they change it, because they know what they're doing. And that's the one thing I don't feel, even though I'm a author and writer, I don't feel I'm not a filmmaker. So if somebody has that skill set and they know what they envision, how to take what I've done and make it into a film, I don't really feel I would consult with them about what, if they ask me what I think, I would give it my
They will,
opinion.
though. They will.
But yeah, but I wouldn't be in a position to say, well, I don't think you should do that, or because even even the simple, it's not simple, but the important significance of having actors that have chemistry between them. And that's another skill that you need, like a casting director. So in my journey that I'm still going on, I've been learning that what I know and what I don't know. And so I don't want to have a production company. That's what I've learned, because I don't want to be having to hire a casting director and all this. I want to go, and I want to go to a production company and say, I have this for you. And plus, in addition to the film I wrote uh, 30 episodes for a series,
A series.
so that
That's where the money is.
if the film was to get traction, if it got, first of all, picked up, if it got traction, I have, and the characters, I believe the characters are very compelling and very likable, and I think that there'd be great parts for all different people. Then I think that if it got traction, that there's series that's ready to go, that there's content. It's not something I'd have to say, well, I could do this. I already have it done. So that's the way I work. My mother used to say, if you tried to tell her all these great things you were going to do, she'd say, well, don't tell me what you're going to do. Tell me what you've done. And so that always sticks in my mind when I think about it. If I said, well, I could write 30 episodes, I could hear my mother, and she'd say, don't tell me that, write them. And so
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing. So
Yeah.
that's what's
No.
keeping me busy.
It sounds like you're doing the groundwork, and that eventually this is going to work into something that's going to be very successful. And then I can say I know you. So
Well,
we have about a minute left, and in that minute, what advice would you give to somebody who's starting out?
I would say to get out, go to like writers groups. Just like if I know that to be in the Long Island Authors Group, you have to be a published author, but there are other writers groups where you go out and you can meet people. Or if, for example, Linda, if you're having a seminar and somebody would come and just listen to what you experience and be able to talk with you afterwards, or go to, book signings, because most everything that I've learned from other people.
Yeah, well,
And
I think that's true, and that's one of the pitches I do about the show is that if you go on the Cablevision channel, that's what I forgot to mention. If you go on the Cablevision channel, you can search through a lot of authors and find out how they did this journey and what you need to do, whether you want to be indie or I like indie because I own everything, or if you want to be traditional, which is of course the best. And that's how you go about it. You've given us a lot of good advice, Tom, and I thank you so much for being on the show.
so good to talk with you again, Linda. Thank you very much for inviting me.
LTV's programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature.